Watchmen blow the gospel trumpet, every soul in God. Whosoever has a message, may repent and turn and live. Now the trumpet, trusty watchmen, blow in other land and sea. God compassion on the passage, every captive may be free. Sounding louder every hill. Ocean depths repeat the message. Oh, salvation's glad refrain. Blow the trumpet, Christian watchmen. Blow in our land and sea. Every captive may be free. Sounding the hedge and highway, earth's asphalt spins so strong. Let it sound all things are ready. Fathers wait to welcome home. Blow the trumpet, trusty watchmen. Blow in louder land and sea. God's great mission sound the message. Every captive may be free. Sounded for the heavy laden, weary longing to be free. Sound the Savior's invitation, sweetly saying, come to me. Now the trumpet, trusty watchman, blow in our land and sea. God and missions of the message, every captive may be free.
Gracious Father in heaven, Lord, we want to praise you and thank you that though this discussion that began just a short time ago has stirred many hearts, it is also doing just what you want it to do, preparing hearts and bringing these discussions to matter, that we could see, Father, what it is you're truly trying to do for us, in us, and through us, that the world will know that we are yours. And so it's my prayer for each one of us to be so fully surrendered to you that we could understand these things as you intend them to be, that we can be such witnesses, Lord, that we can shine such light in the lives of others that they will want to come and follow you. So yes, there is joy, Lord. There is freedom that you want to give us. And it is a tremendous blessing that others will see, Lord. And we just pray for each one of us to understand it and be that blessing to others. I pray that your Holy Spirit would continue to be with us, to enlighten our minds with what is truth, to help us and bless us through this presentation, that we would continue, Father, to see all the different perspectives of this message, that you, Father, by your power can pull them all together, that rather than look like chaos or mingled together in our minds, that you can pull them together in such an order that we see and understand. So be with us, we pray, Father, as we go through this last presentation for the day. Bless our conversation, Father, and may you bless each one of us and wherever we are. We praise you and we thank you and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I think I can get this next one set up. quickly myself right after practice through the last time. So we share it first. Huh? I don't know. I'm just trying to get this open. I want to get it full screen first.
It's in Arkansas, isn't it?
Hmm?
Isn't Pat in Arkansas?
No. Okay.
Who's Marcia? Who's who? Marcia.
Marcia. Hello, Marcia. Somebody's asking who Marcia is, and I don't know, but we want to say hello and blessed Sabbath.
I would have done the same thing.
So,
Oh, can you hear me?
yes.
Oh, we got this link from Patrick Rampy. We're out in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Wisconsin group.
Well, praise the Lord.
Yay.
We're trying. It's just me and my husband today. May we please join you?
By
Yes.
all means. Somebody was asking, who is that? Who is that? So okay. First time I got it right, except for everybody,
Yes.
right? Praise the Lord. Okay. So, Sister Marcia, you guys are studying this message as well then. Are you pretty up to date with Pyrrhus and all of that? Because we're going to jump right into Putin.
We're doing the best we can.
Yeah, I hear you.
We've been watching and listening to programs for many, many years. We've never had someone to study with until just lately, and we'll just sit here and absorb what we can.
Okay, praise the Lord. You're welcome to join us anytime. And if you, if Brother Pat Rampy hasn't given you my email address, if he wants to, or if he just wants to forward what I send, we meet online Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then all day Sabbath.
Wow.
Yes, I sent Marcy your address and forwarded her your previous information.
Okay.
Hi, Marcy. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have different people teaching at different times. We're all taking pieces of this message and studying a presentation, putting together notes, and presenting it. So it's different ones of us each
Yes,
night.
that's what we have gathered.
Yeah. So
Marcy, do you mind if I have your husband's name? Because I always take roll call.
O-R-V.
Excuse me?
O-R-V as in Victor.
Okay, thank you.
Or
So
Nice.
it takes minutes. Minutes, taking notes. Okay, so we're going into the next presentation, which is Putin Part 1. We just came through going through 3 presentations on Ipsis as well as one on Raphia. And these are all taken from the Brazil School of the Prophets classes. We started back in, was it the very end of April, the last week of April or the first week of May? I think it was the last week of April. We started going through from the first class in the Brazil School of the Prophets. So we're on, I don't have it listed here, but I think it's number 27 of the classes. And you can also, I'll be emailing you, unless you'll see it in the email that Pat Rampy sent you, that there's websites there that you can click on go to the websites and you'll find notes that we've all put together from previous studies, not just from Brazil School of Prophets, but from also Canada and other studies. So there's a lot of notes available. Okay, so Putin Part 1. Going into the history of Putin, we've been talking about the war between the King of the North and the King of the South. We're in 2019. What do we think this war looks like? Now we do take the notes kind of verbatim and try to, those of us as we continue to learn can reword them some. So some of them are going to be verbatim for what she says, and some are going to be a little bit, as we learn, as for me anyways, as I learn the message better, I can change a few words here and there to not make it sound like it's her talking. So, but they were taken from the presentations that were given. So some of this is discussion that takes place in the class. So she's asking the class, we're in 2019, what do we think the war looks like? We've had a proxy war since 2011, sanctions mainly since 2014, and we say nothing is going to change, and that's just what the war will continue as. When we say then we're not yet in the Eastern Front. And I missed something there that she was talking about. Why do we say, I'm not sure how she worded that, but why are we not yet in the Eastern Front? What does the Eastern Front look like? In agreement to an earlier study, that there will be a broad information that will influence the government of Trump, looking at what's going to happen going forward. So we have sanctions, proxy wars, and now we're adding at this time information battles. We have the attack of the King of the North to conquer 3 areas. This is what we see until now. So what does that conquering look like? As we've until now, it's about 3 branches of government, which is the legislative, judicial, and executive. So I kind of put the italics part there just because that was somebody asking a question. Sometimes I leave the discussion out, depending on if they go off another side direction that takes us off the topic. But sometimes what they go is useful to where she's headed. So anyway, so if it sounds confusing, that's probably why. And I'll try to note when I've done that. But you can see the italics. It was somebody asking. So when we have the attack of the King of the North to conquer 3 areas, this is what we see now. So what does that conquering look like? So when we consider World War II, we see the 3 allies to the 3 branches. Looking at the 3 allies in World War II, Poland, France, Britain, to the 3 branches, the legislative, judicial, and executive branch. The battle for those 3 allies, where the King of the North or Hitler takes on these 3 allies. How many fronts do you have in World War II? Anybody want to answer that one? 2. 2. So how many battles is Hitler fighting in World War I and World War II? If this is Germany, what disadvantage? Yes, he's fighting 2 battles. In World War I and World War II, if this is Germany, what disadvantage does it have that Britain, France, and Russia don't have?
It's surrounded.
Surrounded by land. It has a particular disadvantage. The problem with Germany is its location. It's the Western Front and the Eastern Front. Which front is the war with the 3 allies? The Western Front. So this is the King of the North fighting 3 allies. Where is the war with the King of the South?
It would be the East.
It'd be the Eastern Front. When we talk about Daniel 11:40, the 3 allies aren't part of that war with the North and the South. What does the Eastern Front look like?
The Western Front.
The Western Front. What does the war look like in our time between the King of the North and the King of the South?
Information
That's
warfare,
what I was thinking.
media going crazy, people being polarized,
Does
riots, revolutions.
proxy fit into that as well, or is it all information?
I think it's all well, because the wars that are taking place are proxy wars.
Yeah.
Oh, I suppose, yeah.
Then we went to World War II and the King of the North against the 3 allies, but what does war look like between Trump and Putin? Which we're kind of semi-answering. So we have this in 2016, you've got 3 allies. The King of the North is fighting for those 3 allies, wanting those 3 allies. You have Germany here. I did as she did, as opposed to pulling up a map in this spot. But if you were to have Germany, the disadvantage that they have is that they're surrounded by mostly land. So for Germany to fight the East, which is what his ultimate goal was, which we've learned in other studies, he could not fight both at the same time. So he had to fight with the Western Front and get an alliance with the East, the King of the South first. That's where you go into 2016, where they're in an alliance. But his ultimate goal is to take down the Soviet Union, the East. So in order to be able to attack the East, he had to first conquer the West, the Western Front. So we're going to go a little bit into Putin's history. The next class is coming up. Before we finish the history of Pyrrhus, we need to know a little bit about our history, particularly Putin. We'll discuss Trump. If we go into the history of Pyrrhus and we see a battle, and that battle says that we're going to see it in 2018, we want to know what we're looking for, because we're saying there is a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South in 2018, which we kind of touched on, but we haven't done that study yet. But that battle is Heraclea. We can't keep going further in the studies without addressing the question about what battles look like in our time. We have some information on Putin to go through, his early life to where we are today. And looking at what battles look like today, in the past, countries battled for territories, for greater land, which made them more powerful. But now the battle is not for greater territories, because you have smaller countries with more money and more power. Are you having trouble finding where you're at? You got it? Okay.
Wait,
He's on his paper notes, and he was trying to find where he's
what's
at.
on the first page?
So, like for instance, one of the examples that was brought up was Japan and Brazil, the size of Brazil versus the size of Japan, but yet the power and strength and wealth of Japan over Brazil.
Robert, she's showing you.
So let's see. To have power today is to have global influence and a network of subordinate countries that are allied to you. When we consider where Putin came from, we only briefly mentioned it. We didn't go into it, but you can line up Putin and Stalin in a special way with both their life stories. Yeah.
Okay, so we're past Ipsis and we're past Heraclea, right?
Mhm.
Now? Okay, and we're going into Raphia. So is that what was the end of Heraclea? What was that again?
Heraclea,
Because, so is this a
Heraclea was 2018.
yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. But so it's a progressive thing till we get to that?
It was a series of events that all took place in, well, I don't know if it carried over into 2019, but a series of events that took place, and we'll go through that because
Okay.
it would be a whole nother study she's done it. She's put the list on the board of things that Trump did, and the different things that happened in 2018 that showed, and what they line up with is in World War, where first Stalin and Hitler were in an alliance, and probably Adriana can explain that better if she wants to now than I can. They were in an alliance, but before Operation in Barbarossa, their alliance broke down, but then they got back into alliance, correct?
yeah,
Something like that.
Hitler, realizing he wasn't wanting to give the shipbuilding plans to Stalin, and he wasn't making payments back for all the resources that Stalin was sending him, because Stalin was sending him metal ores, food, supplies for his army to be able to work, and Hitler was supposed to pay him, and Hitler was supposed to show him building plans for their stuff. And he knew eventually he was going to fight Stalin, and he didn't want to give him all that stuff, so he was just biding time. And so Stalin said, fine, I'm cutting you off, you're not getting more supplies. And it went like that for a month. But after a month, Stalin, then negotiating back and forth, Stalin decided to start giving him stuff again, because he saw that he was still facing a prolonged war on the West, which makes me think that
that's now, right?
Putin is looking at Trump and saying, you're still fighting with the bodies of that nation,
Yeah,
so it looks like I'm still safe, so I'll keep kind of helping you out or whatever. But once Stalin starts doing that, Hitler says, I'm done having to wait on this dude and wait for him and all his stuff. I'm just going to invade him. So then you have resources from Russia coming over while Hitler and his people are going to Russia to destroy it. They're like,
so, and that's the transition into Raphia, right?
Yeah.
Because that's when King of the North strikes.
No, so we can't take it to our time exactly, because it's the King of the South who's supposed to win in our time at this battle. But in World War II, it was at Barbarossa, it was the King of the North going against the King of the South. Yeah, that's where it's confusing between Alpha and Omega histories.
Because Barbarossa is Raphia, and that's where the King of the South attacks the King of the North.
And wins.
Right.
Yeah, but it's opposite in the Alpha history.
Okay.
So to start from the beginning, they were both raised in extreme poverty, Putin and Stalin. Putin was raised in the slums of Leningrad. His first occupation was hunting rats in stairwells. I tried to look up some of these things. That particular one, I wasn't able to find much on his childhood, so I don't know where she got some of the things that she did. but I did look up quite a few things for this study. There would be many families in one flat, and you would separate your family from the other flats with cardboard boxes. It was a very difficult upbringing for him.
There's a series of interviews that Frontline does, the PBS people do with like a very good number, like at least 10 people, where they interview them about information on Putin and why, what's going on with him, why is he the way he is, and they have a lot of background information on him. And I think she might have watched those and got some info from that, because I watched a few of them, and some things popped about because they had those buildings that they lived in, you know, the big mansions that they have in Russia. They have huge mansions, apartment buildings that have all these multiple rooms in their level of the floor, and it's this big, wonderful mansion. And what happened is, when communism came in, they put multiple families in those. Each family would have one room, and then they would use the bathroom facilities in that one actual home. So they were using those mansions, but because of how redistribution of wealth happens in communism, they take everything from the rich people and redistribute to the poor, but the way that looked like is that way. So you would have like one family living out of one bedroom, another family down the hall in this bedroom, and they all had to share the toilet facilities. That was the best of the cases. There's even worse slums where it would be like separated by cardboard and stuff like that. That's why when Stalin went to Germany, he saw that the worst and poorest people in that country had their own washing machine. They had their own toilet facilities. They were living better lives than some of like the best Russian lives that you could see. And it drove him nuts.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Some of the things you learn.
When he made his life work
So,
Stalin did.
so from a young age, he was fascinated with the KGB, the Russian version of the CIA. Stalin became involved with the Bolsheviks and what was his work at the beginning of the Soviet Union. He organized bank robberies, kidnappings, he murdered government officials, he organized paramilitary groups, and when villages weren't being loyal to the Bolsheviks, he would go into the country and burn down entire villages. I think she might have said villagers. I was having trouble with that, but he would go down and burn entire villages. He was so violent that Lenin turned against him. In their own communist parliament, he was reprimanded in the parliament. That was Stalin. So if you have the ability to open up the slideshow that I sent the slideshow in a PDF file. I think I sent also the publisher file for anybody that has publisher. But the links are there, and you can click on them and open them up. Just don't open them in the slide. It advances the slide, which I just did. So Putin's childhood at St. Petersburg was ripe with hardship, but he learned to become a wily, sweet fighter and scrappy underdog. His ambition was rewarded with admission to the Soviet intelligence services as a KGB official. In Dresden, East Germany, he witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. With the collapse of the Soviet Union 2 years later, Putin and 800,000 KGB officers were left shipwrecked. And you can go on to read the rest of that story too. We're going to touch on some of those things.
Was that her word? Was that?
No, this is from an article that I.
Whoa,
Yeah.
they used shipwreck.
Yeah, shipwreck. There's some other places shipwreck comes in. I think shipwreck is at the end of Balaam's story.
Yeah.
In Balaam's parables.
In those interviews on Frontline, it shows you how selfish Putin is in his character, because he was a miracle child. His parents, to be alive at their age and to have a kid that didn't die of starvation was a huge miracle in Russia at that time. And they spoiled him, and they won a little lottery. And with that money, instead of using it to have a place to live and to have food to eat, they bought him a car. And he's like, all right, thanks, bye. Yeah. The stories of it, I mean, he's literally very selfish. I don't know. I'm just very interesting to learn that crazy person.
Okay. Somebody's got some noise going on that we might need to mute. If you want to mute, and if not, I'll figure it out who needs to be muted. I think it's only me that can do it, or if they do it themselves, right? Okay, so I think a lot of us have seen this video, but in your slideshow, you'll be able to open up the link to watch the video. When we consider the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, Stalin was an operative at the beginning and Putin an operative at the end. Stalin had this particular way of fighting that was through violence and paramilitary work. Putin, at the end has his way of fighting, but his work was not this combat way. He joined the KGB and worked in counterintelligence. This type of work all relates to information, how you deceive your enemies, prevent sabotage, to gather political and military information, also to interfere with your enemy's information sources. Stalin is robbing banks and killing people, and then he continues to fight when he's in power in the same way that he was trained to. Putin fighting in the same way he was trained to. He was trained in the work of disinformation. We read when we discussed disinformation that only 15, I'm not sure if that number was right, the way it's worded, that only 15% of the resources of the KGB that went to this intelligence operation, only a small percentage went to espionage. The majority of their work was through a slow process that we've called active measures. A defector of the KGB, he said the purpose was to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite an abundance of information, no one can come to sensible conclusions to defend themselves, their families, their community, and their country.
Oh, I think it's instead of the KGB that went to, it's supposed to be KGB went to intelligence, because it was only 15% that went to intelligence. Only a small percentage went.
That's what I thought.
The rest, like 85% of it was just disinformation.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That 15% is in the incorrect spot the way it's worded.
Yeah.
That's why that was one of the reasons that drew me to go try to find out exactly what he said, because I knew that that wasn't right. So, but most of what they did is what the point is, was in the with the disinformation and such. So Stalin, the work of distorting reality in the West was Vladimir Putin's field to use disinformation. So Stalin fought the same way, what he was trained to, and Putin is fighting the same way that he was trained to. One defector said that fighting a war on the battlefield is the most primitive and stupid way of fighting a war. The highest art of warfare is not to fight at all, but to subvert anything of value in your enemy's country to turn them against one another. So there was a couple of different links here that you can look up. The video, a lot of us have seen it, but this is the defector mentioned in this first paragraph here. In 1989, Putin is stationed in Dresden, East Germany, and he's working in counterintelligence for the KGB. This is right when the protests begin to happen. He's working alongside the East German secret police, the Stasi. Is that how you say it, Stasi? Mm-hmm. In 1989, Reagan was in Germany and called on Gorbachev to tear down the wall. Protesters gathered all across East Germany, and in Dresden, they raided the Stasi headquarters, raided and sacked it. Growing more and more angry, they gathered around the KGB building where Putin was working. He's trying to call back to Russia for instructions and help, but he can't get through. Finally, he reaches someone in Moscow. He tells them he's under threat, that protesters are threatening to storm the building. They tell him Moscow is silent. Putin is on his own. He decides to bluff his way out. He walks to the gates of the building and tells the protesters, the mob, that there are men in the buildings with guns that will shoot them, and this stops the mob from coming in. He then goes to the basement of the building, and with the other agent, they are burning every document they can just in case the building is stormed. In 1990, he returns to Russia, and in the KGB headquarters in Leningrad, he's watching the statues of Stalin and their leaders being torn down. In 1991, he calls this the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, the collapse of the Soviet Union. They asked him last year if he could change one event in this nation's history, what would it be? And he said the collapse of the Soviet Union. A lot of bad things have happened in Russia, but what he wants to change is the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this was from another, I think I was on one of the frontline videos, but these are different people that, I think it was a frontline video, but these are different portions of it, what different people had said. He calls, this is something, this Julie Ioff or whatever her name is in the Atlantic wrote, he calls, there's also a famous story about this. He calls home, he calls Moscow, trying to understand what he is to do, trying to get orders, and Moscow doesn't respond. And this is according to many biographers who have chronicled Putin's life, a massive, massive trauma for him, that this massive historical event is happening. Soviet influence is collapsing before his eyes. And he calls home, he radios home, and home isn't there. So he's working for the KGB from before 1989 and 1990. He returns to Leningrad with the collapse of the Soviet Union. He begins to become involved in politics. From 1991 to 1995, he's working in politics in Leningrad. These are local politics. In 1996, he decides to become involved in state politics. He travels to Moscow and starts winning over Boris Yeltsin. One thing that Putin is good at is politics, how to interact with people. In this time period, he convinced Yeltsin that he also wanted to see Russia as a democracy. And like Lenin, realized that Stalin had tricked him. By the time Yeltsin died, he realized Putin had tricked him. But disinformation and lies was Putin's training. Within 3 years, by 1999, he has become Russia's prime minister. He's working directly under Yeltsin in August 1999. He's the 5th prime minister in 18 months. The government is in chaos. So we saw from where we're retracing here from 1989 that he's in Dresden, East Germany, working for the KGB, and the buildings are stormed, okay? And he winds up, he sees that he's on his own. 1990, he's in Leningrad. 1991 to 95, he starts being in politics. 1996, he's in Moscow and going into state politics. By 1999, August, he's prime minister. In September, we're going to go on to see, is when the apartment bombings happened that start the second Chechen war. Is that how you say that word? Chechen war?
Yes.
Thank you. I thought my Romanian friend would have been quick to say yes. Did I say it
thought
wrong?
I've heard it said Chechenian, but that's probably right. That's fine. Chechen. It's fine.
Chechnya is the name of the country, and Chechen is like, you know, American.
It's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
name of the country. Yeah, because
So Putin becomes prime minister. A month later, in September 1999, is the Russian apartment building bombings. These were the Russian apartment bombings that got Putin elected as president. There were some apartments in Russia where bombs were placed in the basements, and when they went off, nearly 300 people died. Putin blamed terrorists from Chechnya.
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 Not me.
Romania.
Chechnya. Not
Chechnya.
And began the Second Chechen War. There's some discrepancies with this account. His approval rating soared after the bombings. He responded like a strong man, and he took full advantage of that publicity. Many historians, people whose account can be trusted. Now I'm putting that in there. She said whose account she could trust. So I don't know who the historians are, but this is information we can all choose to go our own directions to look up where the Lord leads us. But she's stating in here that there were historians that she trusted their account. Believe that those apartment bombings were organized by FSB. The FSB was set up by the KGB. It's the same thing. It's believed that those apartment bombings were set up with the purpose of promoting Putin into the presidency. There's some solid evidence for this. One of those speakers at the parliament accidentally announced that building has been bombed 3 days before the bomb set off. There's other evidence also. People, eyewitnesses, recognized FSB officers and were able to name them, and later they found undetonated bombs at the bottom of other apartment buildings. FSB claimed this was a training exercise using live bombs without evacuating anyone. This has been a scandal inside Russia. One woman began investigating. Her name is Anna. She's a Russian journalist, writer, and human rights activist, and she was reporting on the Second Chechen War. They arrested her and put her through a mock execution. In 2004, she was poisoned, but she survived. Just 2 of the times they tried to silence her. That would be 1 of the 2 times, I think is how that's supposed to say it. The 7th of October, 2006, she was found dead in a lift. She had been shot in the style of execution. It was just a few blocks from the Kremlin, and it was Vladimir Putin's birthday. A lawyer tried to investigate what she was reporting. He was assassinated in 2009. A journalist saw him being attacked. She tried to save him. She was also killed. Then one of Anna's main informants, 6 months later, was also killed. So there's been a trail of assassinations and executions of anyone who has looked into this. And I do have a couple of things on here on it. The references are there so you can look up more information. This one touches on a name that she brings up as well as Alexander Litvinenko. The Russian apartment bombings were a series of explosions that hit 4 apartment blocks in the Russian cities of, say that one.
Where are you? I don't know.
Boy, up at the top.
Lana?
Moscow and
Bonansk, but
okay.
Yeah, Buynaksk, yeah, that's correct.
In September 1999, killing more than 300, injuring more than 800, and spreading a wave of fear across the country. The bombings, together with the Dagestan War,
Dagestan.
led the country into the Second Chechen War. Vladimir Putin's handling of the crisis boosted his popularity and helped him attain the presidency within a few months. Alexander Litvinenko, who blamed FSB for the bombings in 2 books, was poisoned by FSB agents in London. According to historians, the bombings were coordinated by the Russian state security services to bring Putin into the presidency. This view was justified by a number of suspicious events, including bombs planted by FSB agents in the city of Ryazan, an announcement about bombing in the city of, that one's a tough one too, Volgodonsk, 3 days before it had happened by Russian Duma speaker. I'm going to really fail on these ones.
where
Weak
are you?
evidence.
Where's the pointer? Where are you?
Right here. My pointer always wants to disappear from me.
Oh.
Weak evidence and denials by suspects, none of whom was a Chechen, and a poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko, who wrote the 2 books on the subject. So the link is there. There's a couple of pictures there for you. In the year 2000, one man fled Russia after being threatened by Putin. His name was Litvinenko. Am I saying it right? Can I get him right?
Yeah, correct.
We know.
Okay. He also began to speak about the Chechen War. When he saw Anna had died, he began to speak more about the Chechen War. He wrote 2 books where we talked about the apartment bombing and them being on an inside job with the FSB. On November 1st, 2006, he met with 2 former KGB agents. They claimed to have the information on Anna's death. A few hours after the meeting, he became sick. It was polonium poisoning. He died a few weeks later. Some of his final words, where you may succeed in silencing one man, but there will be protests from around the world that Mr. Putin will hear for the rest of his life.
They use a lot of polonium poisoning.
Yeah.
Yep.
He knew he had killed him. We've covered about 4 or 5 people. There's not enough time to, this is the tip of the iceberg. He has killed dozens of people, but we're just speaking about those directly related to the apartment bombings. So this is just pulled also as well from Wikipedia. It's just additional stuff. It's not in the paper notes. It's only in the slides. Not that we need to go through it all. I put it in there for anybody that wants to go through the review just to see the steps that took place in the apartment bombings. And then culminating in 24th of September, the second Chechen war begins. So criticism in March 2000, Putin dismissed the allegations of FSB involvement in the bombings as delirious nonsense. There are no people in the Russian Secret Service who would be capable of such crime against their own people. The very allegation is immoral, he said. An FSB spokesman said that Litvinenko's evidence cannot be taken seriously by those who are investigating the bombings. According to Russian journalist Andrei Solodov, from the start, it seemed that the Kremlin was determined to suppress all discussion.
Solodov.
Yeah, see, I know I'll say them wrong. I'm trying. You catch me anytime. I don't have a problem with it.
I don't think it matters, but
You know, I appreciate it. When Alexander Prodvanik, a Russian human rights activist, tried to import copies of Litvinenko's and Blensky's blowing up Russia in 2003, they were confiscated by FSB. Treshkan himself, acting as a lawyer for two relatives of the victims of the blast, was unable to obtain information he requested and was entitled to see by law. However, he believed the obstruction may reflect paranoia rather than guilt on the part of the authorities. Russian journalist and radio host Yulia opined that the version about FSB involvement was absurd because it was promoted by Boris Berezovsky, who himself brought Putin to power. However, she criticized the FSB for poor handling the case. According to Strobe Talbot, who was the United States Deputy Secretary of State during the events, there was no evidence to support the conspiracy theory, although Russian public opinion did indeed solidify behind Putin in his determination to carry out a swift, decisive counteroffensive. So there's a lot of information out on a lot of these things. In December 1999, Yeltsin steps down and Putin becomes president. He's relatively new in government to go from just being involved in local politics to president of Russia in 4 years. It's a very quick rise. From the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 to 1999, television and news had become independent. They were free to ridicule their politicians. They would mock Putin. One of their largest companies, and this one I don't know if was it NTV? Anybody know? I wasn't sure if I caught that correct. Is it NTV? Is that what it was called?
NT.
The main television.
Oh yeah, that's probably.
Maybe Lana
It
knows.
sounds right. I don't
What's
know.
that?
It was that show with the puppets that made
Oh,
him
yeah.
crazy.
Was it NTV?
Yeah, NTV.
Oh, V, not B. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, one of the largest companies was in NTV. Putin had it raided, got them not directly, but their parent company. It was the largest independent media company in Russia. He imprisoned their president and said that he could be freed if he would hand over NTV to the oligarchs. An oligarch friendly to Putin. Almost as soon as he comes into power, he began taking over the media. When he became president in 1999, one of the first people to visit him was Bill Clinton. This visit did not go well. Putin was angry with what the United States had done to Russia. Clinton immediately left his meeting with Putin and went to meet with Yeltsin. He said to Yeltsin, "I'm concerned about the man you have turned the presidency over to." He leaned over and touched Yeltsin in his heart and said, "Vladimir Putin doesn't have democracy in his heart." The visit had not gone well, but in 2001, there's a new president. Now there's George Bush. You know, we're backing up to the United States. Clinton's gone and George Bush. Vladimir Putin is hoping he can have a good relationship with the West. In Putin's mind, they can be allies if there's the right president. They're powers that can work side by side. So he began to build a good relationship with George Bush. George Bush said famously, "I looked the man in the eye and found him to be very straightforward. I was able to get a sense of his soul. He's a man deeply committed to his country and to the best interest of his country." So it starts off well. They are friends. Were you going to say something?
It's just George Bush is such a flu. Like, was a ridiculous man, is what he was.
So it starts
He had a
off.
sense of his soul. Dude, all the political analysts have been trying to figure out, what did he mean he saw a sense of his soul? What are you talking about? This guy's crazy. Like,
Wait, it's
what are you doing?
kind of interesting too, though, that Trump thinks he's a great guy,
Exactly, same thing Trump is doing.
which would
But
be,
we know they're enemies.
yeah, because they're both from the same right side. Well, I don't know, because Trump just took the side that he finally could win under. So
Fibers of the same cloth.
yeah.
Right.
So it starts off well, and they are friends. And then 9/11 happens. Vladimir Putin was the very first world leader to call George Bush and give sympathy and support. He was trying to work as like a global partner to give advice, to offer help. But Bush wanted to go a certain way, and that was into war with Iraq, which was exactly what Vladimir Putin didn't want. He watched America conduct regime change in the Soviet Union, and he was very against the Iraq war. He tried to convince Bush not to go into war, but he suddenly found he was not listened to. In 2003, the Iraq war began. Putin had said about the Iraq war that it was shaking the foundations of global stability, that Bush went against international law. He spoke strongly against it. In 2003, he's still saying we have a good relationship in the United States, so they might listen to us. But George Bush's language is different. He's speaking of spreading democracy. George Bush said, and everywhere that freedom stirs, let tyrants fear. We don't fully realize what the Iraq war resulted in. This is what turned Putin against the West. He was willing to negotiate until then. In 2004, Russia suffers another terrorist attack. Chechen terrorists hijacked a school. Over 1,000 people were held hostage. Putin ordered the army to attack the school. Nearly a third of the hostages died in the firefight that followed. Putin blamed the Chechen attack on the United States. His tone begins to change. It's after this terrorist attack in 2004, he canceled elections and forced out opposition leaders. In 2004, he set up a dictatorship. So you got 9/11 here in 2001, George Bush, and then you have the Iraq War, and then in 2004 you have the Beslan terrorist attack. The Beslan school siege, also referred to as the Beslan school hostage crisis or Beslan massacre, started on the 1st of September 2004, lasted 3 days, involved the illegal imprisonment of over 1,100 people as hostages, including 777 children, 777 children, and ended with the deaths of at least 334 people. The crisis began when a group of armed Islamic militants, mostly Ingush and Chechen, occupied school number 1 in the town of Beslan, North Ossetia, and Republic in the North Caucasus region of the Russian Federation. On the 1st of September 2004, the hostage takers were the Riyad Salim, sent to the Chechen warlord, who demanded recognition of the independence of Chechnya and Russia withdraw from Chechnya. On the 3rd day of the standoff, Russian security forces stormed the building with the use of tanks, incendiary rockets, and other heavy weapons. As of December 2006, 334 people, excluding terrorists, were killed, including 186 children. The event led to security and political repercussions in Russia. Most notably, it contributed to a series of federal government reforms, consolidating power in the Kremlin and strengthening the powers of the president of Russia. As of 2016, aspects of the crisis in relation to the militants continue to be contentious. Questions remain regarding how many terrorists were involved, the nature of their preparations, and whether a section of the group had escaped. Questions about the Russian government's management of the crisis have also persisted, including allegations of disinformation and censorship in the news media, whether the journalists who were present at Beslan were allowed to freely report on the crisis, the nature and content of negotiations with the terrorists, allocation of responsibility for the eventual outcome, and perceptions that excessive force was used. The European Court of Human Rights in 2017 ruling criticized Russia for not taking sufficient precautions before the event and for using excessive lethal force when conducting the siege, which violated their right to life.
Wait, what was it? What was this? I mean, I did look into this. So there was a really hostage crisis, right?
Right.
That happened, and so
it strengthened the powers of the president of
okay.
Russia.
And how did it do that? It was the same thing like with them being able to have more into our privacy, and that like with the Patriot Act, with the Patriot Act.
In comparison to what happened here, you mean?
Yes, that's what I'm
giving
thinking.
the government more power.
Yes.
Yeah, giving the government more power.
But isn't that a conspiracy theory?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just,
Well, I thought that's what they said before about 9/11 and everything like that, because it was Islam.
Well,
it was Islam. But I think what she's asking, if I'm not necessarily going down that road,
yeah,
but I think what she's asking though is because it increased the power of it brought Putin to be dictator. And
they consolidated the powers in the Kremlin, is what it said. So
we're seeing the steps taken that made Putin a dictator.
Yeah, it's very much like what I always thought with the Patriot Act, though. I mean, I thought I was thinking the same thing just as you're reading it. It does sound like almost the exact same thing. So it's just.
Yep. So we're going to go back to 1989. He becomes president, but he's weak because Russia is run by oligarchs. When it goes from a communist country to a capitalist, all their state-owned holdings are privatized. They sold off, and I did put, that came up, what is privatized, whoever asked that, but to get a specific definition, I did put it up there, to transfer a business, industry, or service from public to private ownership and control. They sold off almost for nothing. So a small group of powerful men buy them up.
Sorry, if public control would be something like the stock market, because
No, it was like for example, any fabric or some kind of a plant that makes something, like anything, everything belonged to the government because it was left over of the Soviet Union. So like everything belongs to the government. There's no private business. And when the government collapsed, the Soviet Union collapsed, then there was this thing going on that the government was allowing the private citizens to buy out for a small price. It was like actions we called akции. It's like a piece of paper, like bonds that promise you that you will have a share.
a certificate kind of.
Yeah, something like that. So, but what they did is that smart people, rich people, they buyed out from the regular people, because everybody was allowed to have a portion. So they would go around and offer a higher price, not just higher price. They will offer a price for these actions and offer people to just sell them this actions, and people sold them not knowing what it actually means, because we had no idea what are stocks or stock market or what is bonds. There was no concept, and most of the people had no idea what is it that they were given. And when they knew, because it was a hard time, when they knew that they were offered some money, they happily just sold it off, not knowing that they were actually selling their stocks for very cheap.
I have one.
You have one? For what?
I don't know, but I went to the bank and it's worth like $300.
$300?
Yeah.
Did you take them out?
No.
Oh, you're waiting till it's $400.
So they sold off almost for nothing. So a small group of powerful men buy them up. They become Russia's oligarchs, and that was a bloodthirsty battle over those holdings. So Putin has become president, and there's one man in Russia named Bill Browder. If you're going to research, these are the names we need to know. Bill Browder, Litvinenko, particularly Bill Browder. He came from the United States and began to invest in Russia. He started an investment company, the most successful investment company ever known, because they were able to invest in these companies that had been privatized. In around 1999, he began to realize that the companies he was investing in were very corrupt. He decided to start researching their corruption and then releasing how they were doing this corruption to journalists and the media. Other people before him had tried to handle the corruption. They tended to die. So he had a good group of bodyguards. In 1999, Bill Browder is fighting the oligarchs. Who else is fighting the oligarchs? Vladimir Putin. So we've got up here 1999, Bill Browder, he is fighting the oligarchs. Putin is fighting the oligarchs.
At the same time?
At the same time.
Okay.
They had a common enemy. Bill Browder is investigating these powerful men and uncovering their corruption. And that helps Vladimir Putin, because then Putin is able to arrest those that corrupt, but not because they are corrupt, but because they threaten his power. Towards the end of 2003, this changes and Putin makes his move to control them. He takes the richest oligarch, richest man in Russia, the owner of one of their oil companies. He arrests him on his private jet, brings him back to Russia, and puts him on a public trial. His name is Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Is in his oil company is Yukos. He puts him inside a cage in a courtroom and has the news cameras come in and film it. This is the richest man in Russia, and what Putin is doing is sending a message to all the oligarchs. One by one, they submit to Putin and they ask what they need to do to be safe. On top of doing as Putin tells them to do, they must also give him a cut of their profits. Now Bill Browder is in trouble, because now when he's attacking the oligarchs, he's no longer attacking just them, but Vladimir Putin, because Putin is taking a cut off of their corruption. Around this time in 2003, Vladimir Putin also makes a deal with the Russian mafia. Over this time, he brings in the oligarchs and the mafia. Everything is state controlled. You don't have a mafia in Russia that is separate from the government. So now Bill Browder is in danger. Is that outside? That noise?
Yeah, the neighbor.
in our backyard.
It did sound
The
like it.
neighbor, this is what I'm talking about as well.
Around this time in 2003, Vladimir Putin makes a deal. Let's see, we'll go back. So now Bill Browder is in danger. In 2005, he's detained in a Russian airport and deported. He's declared a threat to national security. He evacuated his staff and sold everything he had in Russia. In 2007, police officers raided his offices in Moscow. They were able to re-register his companies in their own names. They took over his companies. They did not know that he had already drained his accounts when he fled Russia. They got no money from this. What they did instead is they asked for a tax refund from his businesses, but the taxes he paid to the Russian government was $230 million. They asked for this tax refund on the 23rd of December. It was paid to them the following day with no questions asked. The biggest tax refund in Russian history. To be able to do this, they've been able to trace bribes at every level, at every stage, and this has to have been at Putin's approval and go ahead. Who can explain to me? I don't really understand the tax refund thing. Anybody?
Let me see.
I mean, I know what a tax refund is. I just don't get it in this scenario here.
Where does
They
the story
ask
start
him for
again?
more money.
Down towards the bottom, last couple sentences.
All I know is that when we did our taxes, they, unless you had like my brother, because he had a special reason because of his condition, then he was allowed to make payments. But if he didn't have any of that, he would have had to pay it all at once. And that's what I know. So I don't. That's here though.
Yeah, I don't get what Adriana's looking at it intently. Maybe she understands.
I think the issue is it's saying that the government asks for a tax refund, but a tax refund goes back to the person. Just a tax, I think, that they asked from him. Yeah, like
It was a way of
extortion.
getting money from Browder, right?
Yeah.
He took all his money, but they wanted his money and they took it through a tax refund.
Well, the
In
thing,
his name?
the way I'm seeing this
His
is
business.
he was not supposed to owe them this money properly, but they asked for, and he was willingly just to get rid of them. So they got this money from him.
Oh, and then they killed him. That's messed up.
They didn't
No,
kill
they
Bill
didn't kill Bill
Browder.
Browder.
No,
They didn't kill Bill Browder.
they killed his lawyer, Magnitsky.
Yeah,
Bill
Minsky.
Browder's not the one that gave him the
Wasn't
money.
he?
No, his
Wasn't,
business.
Yeah, the business.
but I heard, wasn't he tortured or something?
That was the lawyer.
Lawyer Bill Browder's still alive. They're still trying to kill him.
Slide right here.
Isn't Bill Browder hiding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill Browder began to speak publicly against what he had seen happen. He hired a young lawyer inside Russia, Sergei Magnitsky. Magnitsky testified in Russia to the Russian version of the FBI. In 2008, the same offices that he testified to.
Can you mute the person with the? I think maybe the
I'm
phone.
sorry.
Getting an echo.
I just don't have everybody opened up, so hang on one second.
I think they muted.
Okay. Okay. It's hard when the slideshow's open to pull up that screen. Okay, Magnitsky testified in Russia to the Russian version of the FBI. In 2008, the same offices that he testified to arrested Magnitsky. He was beaten and tortured. They tried to have him take back his testimony. For over 6 months, he was moved to different jails. Through harsh conditions and torture, his health broke down. November 16th, 2009, they tied him to his bed and beat him to death. Bill Browder was very angry, and his life purpose since then is to get justice for Magnitsky. What Bill Browder now does is go from country to country and ask them to pass a Magnitsky Act. What this act does is put sanctions on everyone that benefited from Magnitsky's death. Some of Russia's most powerful people, including Vladimir Putin, can no longer access their money in Western bank accounts because of these sanctions. Trump and Putin met in Helsinki in 2018. When they came and stood out in the front, they gave a small account of what they had spoken about. Trump said Putin was so generous, the only thing he'd asked of me is that I give him an interview with Bill Browder. So you have a meeting.
It's gonna kill him.
Yeah. So you have a meeting between the King of the North and the King of the South, their very first meeting. And what does Putin want more than anything? Bill Browder. He's considered to be Putin's #1 enemy. Through these early years, we can see Putin take control of Russia. He silences the media first, then he brings in the oligarchs, the Russian mafia, and then in 2004, all opposition is silenced due to a terrorist attack. Interesting.
That was
Because-
the besiege on the school that he was able
Yeah,
to do that.
Beslin School, yeah.
The Beslin. Yeah.
Where he was then made a dictator. So we know that, I'm sidetracking for a second to ask a couple questions. So we know that Trump is a dictator at 2016, he's a dictator at 2018, but we know there's a transition. So in this here, he silences the media. We know that's what Trump is doing. Then he brings in the oligarchs, the Russian mafia, and then in 2004, all opposition is silenced due to a terrorist attack. Does that give him full power then? I'm speaking of Trump. By then, the Iraq war is happening, and now he is speaking against the United States. In 2004 was the Beslin terrorist attack. Opposition was silenced. It's progressive. I don't think it's a coincidence, but every dictatorship starts with the media. You take down the media before anything else. It's a pattern we can see Trump following.
I see it.
So something comes about that,
Well, we have all these trending mass shootings going on, and people are so in fear that they don't even want to go to the store or go to the park or anything And that's besides the point for some of these people going to the clubs and everything else. But at the same time, you know, you have people living in fear, and all these things happening in the world. I don't know if that, and then you have a cap on guns, but there's this, then it becomes this debate over guns and stuff or how to solve this problem. But I think the mass shootings is really doing
Significant.
something.
Yeah, mass shootings have a lot to do with the Second Amendment as well.
Yeah, it really does. Like the mass shootings are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I just don't know if that's also going to play a part into his move. I don't know.
Satan's stirring up some things.
Yeah.
Because even Donald Trump has been forced to come with a reform on guns because of it. And
true.
The Republicans seem to want it also now, which was never, ever an idea that would cross anyone's mind.
The NRA just gave Trump a hefty warning, apparently, yesterday, because he was trying to come against the, whatever, the rights of the gun rights.
We know that clause is in, it was included to, it was interesting. I wish I would have saved, I don't think I put it in these notes, something that I came across that, you know how we've been understanding that the two sides read the Constitution differently. Mm-hmm. One side thinks that it says we're to be a Christian nation, and one side knows it's not. So it had to do with one side and the way they were speaking about gun control, and they had a completely different interpretation of why that was put into the Constitution to begin with, the Second Amendment to have guns, and it was completely reversed. And it was like, the bells went off. Okay, they're reading it different, completely different. Because the guns, if I understood correctly, the guns were placed in there to protect us from the government.
Yeah, exactly.
And they had it completely. So over here, I do have the bit on the Magnitsky Act, but I'm just going to read the one on the bottom that's Browder, that said, "I have been under his skin for a long time," Browder told me, referring to Putin. He pointed to the expansion of the Magnitsky Act across 7 countries and counting. Go ahead.
You know, this is on the Second Amendment.
Oh.
And that's what that's what Brother Tyler said Parmenter is really looking into.
It's the Second Amendment.
And it's so interesting that, like, all of a sudden that just became the headline of the news. Like, I don't know.
It's been there for a while.
I know, but I mean, it really just started sprung out with all these mass shootings going on, like crazy.
It's for separation of states versus the government, because the whole point of this country is it's not a government of the United States, it's a government of states, and the states only give the rights to the government that they need to keep it organized. But if the top level of the government ever gets too controlling and starts to think they can tell all the states what to do and they don't all want to follow, then they have to rebel, and they have to be able to be armed to rebel, a militia of the states to protect themselves against the government.
We have the right to bear arms, foreign or domestic.
Yeah. So this is Bill Browder. "I've been under his skin for a long time," Browder told me, referring to Putin. He pointed to the expansion of the Magnitsky Act across 7 countries and counting, and to the money laundering investigations that have been launched as a result of the discovery of the alleged tax fraud scheme. He knows this has the potential to bring down the Russian government at some point in time. So that was an article in the Atlantic too, and the links are there if you want to read more of those articles. In 2007, Putin is speaking in Munich, Germany, and says, "I'm allowed to speak my mind, aren't I?" And then he launches an angry attack against the United States, particularly because of the Iraq war. He says, first, the United States has overstepped its national borders in the economic and political spheres. It pushes on other nations. Who would like this? This is, of course, extremely dangerous. It results in the fact that we no longer feel safe. I want to emphasize this. No one feels safe. Putin's mindset is interesting. From the time he was in Dresden, Germany, he knows the personal threat to the United States can be when it's conducting regime change and when it's flexing its muscles. By the time he gets into power in 1999, he has no sympathy for Clinton. He won't work with him. But he thinks he can work with George Bush, and the relationship is going well. But when he sees what the United States did in Iraq, he knows that the same United States that took down the Soviet Union and who's refusing to listen to him now, all must abide by international law, would not hesitate to destroy him. When the United States invaded Iraq, they broke international law. That's not a conspiracy theory. They went into that against the United Nations. That's illegal. So when the journalist stands up and says to Vladimir Putin, you invaded the Ukraine, what do you think he's going to say? You invaded Iraq. And they'll say, you invaded Georgia. And we can still say, you invaded Iraq against international law. And he knows that the United States has not changed. So what you were saying in 2007, that no one feels safe, it shows some of his personal paranoia. The relationship with George Bush has disintegrated. In 2009, Vladimir Putin has finished his second term as president. George Bush has finished his second term as well. So now you have a new president in Russia and the United States. This is Medvedev and Obama.
That's so interesting. Well, just that whole history, how that like so aligned. That's really interesting.
I thought Medvedev wasn't a president.
Ouch.
He was
co-ruler.
co-ruler with Putin.
Okay, co-ruler. Okay.
What that looked like was Medvedev was president and Putin was the prime minister, was the prime secretary, whatever.
Prime minister, I think.
Yeah.
But more so in control with Medvedev out front, playing the role of out front, but it was Putin. It was Putin all along.
So he was basically a puppet.
He puppet in the front.
Because the one that I had is where the lesson that I was giving, it said they didn't even mention that he wasn't president. Yeah. Okay.
He was. What do you mean?
Medvedev was, yeah.
But in on the fifth lesson that we learned, it said he wasn't. They didn't even mention that he wasn't, unless it's a typo.
It must have been a typo because he had to become a president because at that time Putin couldn't serve a third term. So they were both part of the same party, and Putin had an agreement with him to go ahead and be the president for that term, and then he would come back in the next term.
Okay.
But they were making statements like as if, what
Together
is the model?
we win.
Yeah, together we win. And so people kind of knew that, you know, they were still kind of co-ruling. They were aware of that relationship and that kind of rulership, that it was a co-ruling, you know, and so even though he wasn't president, he still had his influence there.
It was just a way to get past the electoral process. Like for the people to actually elect someone, because Medvedev, he stepped down in the next election. He didn't even bother going because he
didn't bother. What I was trying to say is that there are these people who were there that told what it was like when Medvedev went to say that he wasn't going to run for the next election. He looked like the night before he had been through some stuff. Like he looked like he had been crying and had been going through some really horrible things. So I don't think it was a willing choice. No one thinks it was a willing choice. Let me finish. And then when Putin came in, they had these massive riots. People were shocked. And in that moment, when Medvedev did that, looking like that, and said he's not going to run again, and then Putin said he is going to run, Russia knew that it didn't have a free election anymore. At that point, and they knew it. And there were all those revolutions and riots going on.
What did you say, John?
I was just agreeing, like they knew they had a dictator at that time.
Yeah.
So was there an implication that that Putin threatened him and said that?
Yeah. That's what everyone in Russia assumed.
Yeah.
Because Putin has everything under his control. He has the oligarchs, the security system, and all you need to do is take his family and threaten them, and then Medvedev is going to do whatever you want. That's what the KGB. He has KGB tactics. He's not going to ever stop using them. He never has.
Yeah.
That's what we learned.
When they chose Medvedev, he had to be agreeing to lots of stuff with Putin. He was, when I said the puppet, he was really the puppet, because Putin put him in front, and if he would have done a wrong move, he would have been there.
Oh yeah, that's
and
true.
he knew this.
How do you, because from what they talk about, Medvedev
Together we win.
Medvedev during his presidency was trying to change some things, and he did. in Russia. That's what I'm saying, is if you look into it and you research it, he was trying to make some changes. And so when he realized he wasn't going to get to come back again, that's what they were saying. It looked like Medvedev was shocked also. And he looked like he had been through some stuff. So something bigger than we realized happened there. Because
tell me this, he was put by Putin, right? We know this. So how did it happen that he was elected? Is it because people elected him? Or it was...
I'm not saying that that's not how it happened, but Putin saw someone he could get out when it's time. Do you know what I'm saying?
He only wanted him to spend, if I understand correctly, he only wanted him to do those 4 years so that he could come back, right? If I understood simply.
It was all set up.
It was all purposeful so that he could, because he couldn't run 3 consecutive terms, he could only run 2, but you can come back after a term passes, then come back and start with number 1 again, right?
That's the way I
And so he
understood
had
it.
Medvedev there purposely to, so whatever went on behind the scenes with that, I don't know, but
Was there a friendship there, or what was that relationship there?
That was
You
a
know?
Medvedev, gun, and Putin holding it.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we read enough to understand.
I'm not sure if Putin has friends.
yeah.
he gives the job of rebuilding this relationship to his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. We'll go into that in another study. Before we go back to Pyrrhus, we're talking about, I think that was Obama, right? We kind of jumped ahead here. Before we go back to Pyrrhus, we'll cover the history of Clinton. We need to have a little bit more knowledge of this, even if the names don't come easily. Well, I can attest to that. I don't know if that's what she means. But in teaching this in one place, in referencing the 2016 election and the things that are being questioned inside the movement, people don't know any of this history. Say, why would Putin go into alliance with Trump? They believe in conspiracy theories that he was actually in alliance with Hillary Clinton. They're questioning why Putin would ever have a problem with Clinton being president. Perhaps we're still not comfortable with how Putin works or why he's doing what he's doing. I think we have more to understand prophetically about his early history, how Putin turned against the West, but particularly when it comes to what his problems are, what he wants from Donald Trump. What he asked for Bill Browder. What he's fighting against is sanctions. How many have you heard of the meeting in Trump Tower 2016? I think in America, this was in Brazil, but in America, I think we all have. In 2016, there was a meeting in Trump Tower between a Russian lawyer, Natasha. Part of the investigation into Trump is why this Russian lawyer met in secret with his campaign manager and son-in-law. This lawyer, Natasha, was tasked with one job from the Kremlin. She's a lawyer that travels around the world, and her one task is take down acts and destroy Bill Browder. That is what much of this is coming down to. Trump said that meeting was about sanctions. That part of his lies was true. She was trying to get them to turn on Bill Browder. She wanted the campaign team, if Trump was elected, to remove sanctions on Russian government. That's one of the reasons Trump is under investigation. Some of these things start to tie together, and they can give us a picture of what is happening in politics today.
Her name is Natalia, okay?
You know what? I had Natalia, and I looked it up, and we'll see in a minute.
Yeah, I have it right here. It's Natalia.
Natasha is the same as Natalia. Natasha is like a Bill from William.
Okay.
Oh, good. Thanks for clearing that up, because I know I specifically, I had Natalia, and I went and looked it up, and I found her under Natasha, so that clears it up.
My friend in high school told me all Russian people have a nickname. All their names have a nickname.
Okay, so.
One of my Russian friends, her name was Olga.
I don't know what that
Let me see if I can figure out where they go together here. Okay, so why Trump is under investigation. Some of these things start to tie together. They can give us a picture of what's happening in politics today in Russia under investigation. he used the terrorist attack as an excuse to come out against terrorists, but he specifically blamed the United States for terrorist attacks. And when your nation is afraid, what he's been able to do in Russia is make them see that everything is the United States. He's given them the idea that he's the only person that can keep them safe. Anything that opposes him, any opposition of a protest, is sponsored by the United States. It made it much easier in 2004 to remove the opposition, and he canceled the elections that were being held. So we have Bill Browder, Litvinenko. Bill Browder is, after his lawyer was killed, he goes around and makes it his mission to bring in these Magnitsky acts, which brought sanctions against the Russian oligarchs, right? Am I paraphrasing that correctly? Okay.
It froze their monies.
Froze their money. And so then Natasha, and I'm not going to try the last name, I'll just leave that. Natasha is brought in to, with the one thing is to take down Bill Browder and stop the Magnitsky.
Oh, Vaselinskaya.
Huh?
Vaselinskaya.
There you go. Thank you.
Vaselnitskaya, never mind.
Wait, but Natasha, so who brings her in again? Sorry, I missed.
Putin.
Here's
I
one
know.
site that says Natalia, and there's another site that says Natasha. So
The same thing.
same thing. So, and this is extra stuff that you guys can read on your own. I just put it in there to put down who these people are. Were you going to ask something? Sorry.
No, I did. It's like who, but I know, okay, so Putin brings her in, but like, why would she do that? If they know, why was she on Putin's side?
Money.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
She's on, she was accused of laundering money too. She was in one of the schemes, when I was doing my research. She also was, in trouble.
Yeah, I think I have this down in here somewhere.
Okay.
That they're
Something got to do with, housing or property, something like that.
Yeah, Russian and Trump Tower meeting is charged in case that shows Kremlin ties. And then the Russian official with ties to the lawyer and Trump Tower meeting, that's somebody else, dies in a helicopter crash. So she was arrested for something just recently involved with this, showing that she had Kremlin ties. Huh?
No.
I think it's in one of my sources back that I have read out.
Probably so, because all our studies are kind of intermingled.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm going to skip past these, and those that the slides were emailed out, so you can click on any of the links that you want to check more of the research on who these people are. And there's Bill Browder. I think we might be almost to the end of it.
You know,
I think this is the last one.
You know what I was thinking, Sister Lane? I was thinking, like, you copied and pasted all of that, right? Yeah, because I was like, whoa, that's a lot of links you made. After
Wikipedia picks up these links.
Yeah,
I only put the bottom one in there to make sure that people
that's
can
what you're
read the
talking
rest
about.
of them.
Okay.
The bottom links are the ones that'll take you to those websites. These will each take you to different things too.
Yeah.
So there's Bill Browder, the one that Putin wants. And I think we're pretty close to the end. Yeah, that was the end. So, but those notes didn't go into the paper notes. They were only included in the slideshow. So you can get them if you can open the slideshow. Okay, questions or comments? Discussion. If you want to change the topic to go back to the previous discussion.
Any burning questions?
I got Christina.
I know.
I found that one quote from Wikipedia in regards to Medvedev and Putin. It says, on 24th September 2011, while speaking at the United Russia Party Congress, Medvedev announced that he would recommend the party nominate Vladimir Putin as its presidential candidate, and that the two men had long ago cut a deal to allow Mr. Putin to return to the presidency in 2012 after he was forced to stand down in 2008 by term limits. This switch was termed by many in the media as Rokurovka, some Russian word, the Russian term for the chess move castling. Medvedev said he himself would be ready to perform practical work in the government. Putin accepted Medvedev's offer the same day and backed him for the position of the Prime Minister of Russia in case the United Russia, whose list of candidates in the elections Medvedev agreed to head, were to win in the upcoming Russian legislative election. The same day, the Russian Orthodox Church endorsed the proposal by President Medvedev to let Putin return to the post of president of Russia. So there's a couple interesting things there. For one thing, Putin and Medvedev just swapped roles.
Was
Putin
Medvedev
was
the prime minister?
Putin was the prime minister under Medvedev, wasn't he? And then they swapped it.
Oh.
Because it says that Putin, when Medvedev said that Putin should be president, so he became the party head, and then Putin backed Medvedev as the prime minister.
So then he wasn't president.
Who?
Medvedev?
No, Medvedev was elected president in the 2008 election. So in 2008, he was the president because Putin couldn't be president that time.
Okay.
But at the end of his term, rather than Medvedev running for president again, they backed each other for their roles. So Medvedev said, I think that Putin should be the party head. And they said that they made that agreement a long time ago. And so Medvedev's deal in the whole thing was that he got to be at least promoted as for the prime minister. I don't know if he ended up being the prime minister or not, but Putin backed him for that. But then the other interesting thing is that the state-controlled church, the Russian Orthodox Church, endorsed the proposal by Medvedev to let Putin return to the post of the presidency. It's a lot of interesting things because you have a state-controlled church as opposed to a church that controls the state, and so the church is backing them as well because they're obviously controlled by it. So there's like the Johnson Amendment in the United States refused. I don't know if it's been crushed or not, but you weren't allowed to talk about politics in church. But there, I'm sure it's completely open that the government is allowed to use the church as almost like a place to harvest voters. So there's not really a fair election there.
Yeah.
In the
Well,
first place. Yeah.
It's amazing different pieces to the puzzle that to me it is like putting together a puzzle, and all these different pieces. There's some of them are kind of putting together a picture, but there's still a lot of the pieces in my head that are scrambled. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way.
So the leaders wanted Putin in office, but the people didn't.
Wait, may I speak? You know, maybe in bigger cities, I haven't been there for like 11 years, but maybe in bigger cities there are people who don't like him, but in the village countryside, people like him much more, and the reason is because Putin is a very smart person. He's extremely witty, and when he speaks, it is very refreshing to listen to him. He also, like, even when he speaks with the, on those assemblies of European, I don't know what is it, like United Nations or, one of those assemblies with the Europeans where they would be discussing about the energy crisis, and so on and so forth. But he's very witty, and it's not that simple. And another thing is that even though he promotes nationalism around the world, in former Soviet Union area, in Russia right now, he's the first person ever to put. Russia consists of many little nations that have been annihilated and annexiated by Western Russia, which is the true Russia. And it was there was never in history that a person who is ethnically from that region, like let's say Eastern Russia, that would be actually present and would be have a voice in the government, like represent his own country. So he would not only allow, but he would encourage the local people to ethnically local people to represent their own countries. So it's not, and people like that. it's not, this has never happened before. And many people in the cities, they don't like him because he does that. Like they say, why is this person, he's not even, you know, Russian, he shouldn't be here. And he would say that person is representing his own country, and that's okay, that's how it's supposed to be. So he may be a thug, and uses different kind of manipulations outside the world, you know, in the outer world, but inside the country, he's not, I wouldn't say not a nationalistic, but like he opposes the fascists, because there is a very significant fraction right now of Russian, I wouldn't call them neo-Nazi, but Russian version of neo-Nazis. And this is a very serious issue, and he's the one who opposes them. So people, even so, they know that he's probably, you know, has made like tons of money on this, from the country, but it looks like he's the strong person who can oppose the communism. So there's two major fractions. One is the communists, another one, like full-blast communists. Another one is the nationalists that are a lot more extreme than you would think, you know, that are like really extreme. And he is the one who opposes them. So I would say that even so, to us, you know, to say like to Americans, it looks like, oh, he's such a, you know, such a tyrant or something. But inside the country, it's not like that. So I'm not trying to defend him, but I'm just trying to show you that the reason why he's being, even so, yes, there might be a voting manipulation, so on and so forth. But I personally know that people that still like him, and you know, he's truly the only person, the first ruler who allows the ethnically local people to represent their own land, you know. So it's just my little input.
It's interesting because you mentioned there's a lot of comparisons with Trump. I mean, Trump, you said that Putin was liked by maybe a little bit less in the like the city kind of areas, but in the rural areas is where he had a lot of support. And Trump was the same thing. It was the electoral college is why he actually won. He didn't get the majority vote. He won because he worked a lot harder than Hillary during the election, and he went to all these little places that had more, or the electoral college representatives, I forget what they call them. He knew what he was doing. He got the minority. He didn't get the majority vote, but he won the election because he understood that there were these representatives were ultimately going to dictate who was going to win the election. It doesn't really have anything to do with the majority vote. So they did the same thing there, but then a comparison between the two that makes them the opposite is that if Putin is opposing these extremist nationalists,
yes.
Trump is doing the opposite, where he's almost turning a blind eye to them because he recognizes that he has their support, so he doesn't really want to shoot them down. He may not agree with them, but he's not really doing anything against them because he wants to get elected again.
To me, Putin is using everything that's in his available for him to get what he wants. So it's not really like to promote nationalism or something like that. He's not an ideologist. He's in a way he's kind of he's almost sensible, except that he's a KGB person. When the government people are trained to look at West and see a threat, and it's not baseless too, you know. So so I mean, I'm not trying to defend, but at the same time they are kind of opposites. Yeah.
I actually agree because, and I say this almost tongue in cheek, but if you ignore all the killings that Putin was responsible for, if you look at him as a leader, he was the best thing for Russia and for the Russians. He's a level-headed person. I remember if you cancel out the fact, you know, that he is responsible for all these things. But I mean, I don't know how many people in politics they do have these skeletons in their closet. But I've always found that Putin he's a calm and collected leader. Like you said, he's not an ideologist, and he's always been focused. He's had a passion for Russia. So the collapse of the Soviet Union was, for him, it was a heartbreaking thing, and he wanted to bring it back to its former glory. And that's what he's doing. It's Russia first, just like Trump is America first. But America first, it's funny because they don't actually know what America in its former glory was. The people that back Trump, they have the wrong perspective of what its former glory was.
You know, I'm going to reveal some of my ignorance and ask a couple questions, because I think it was in the Mueller report. There was a couple of the documentaries that I listened to yesterday as well. One was the Mueller report. I can't remember if I watched another one, but talking about, that was the trade wars, Trump's trade wars. Because how he went to, if I understood it correctly, I don't know if it was said this way, but the way I understood it is that he kind of went to the middle class people. Is that right? The workers, the blue collar workers.
Putin or Trump? I guess
Trump.
Yeah. And
so, and again, I have my own lack of intelligence here, but don't you kind of get to the lesser educated people when you do that?
I've heard that said I've heard that said in our message, but to assume that blue collar people are lesser.
Everybody. I'm not talking about everybody in general, but how he went about it. But what he seems to have gone to is the people that he can rile up who are susceptible to one side. Is that, I don't know if I'm saying it right.
I personally feel that they weren't riled up because of some were definitely riled up because of the lack of education, because we have video evidence of that. But
yeah, so I wasn't trying to
yeah.
I'm asking questions because I don't know. I was watching yesterday when it came to the trade wars is that their view of his idea of things made sense without having the understanding of the outcome of his view and what he wanted to do.
I think what he really riled up in most of the blue collar people was the hope of prosperity, because all of their jobs had been pushed over to China and to Asia and everything like that, and they had lost everything. And blue collar work, there's always work, and these people will always work, and they're not necessarily, like you say, there are some that are uneducated there, and I think that they were riled up by the nationalist kind of side of things. But I think that when you go back to him before the election, and when he was going town to town, he was giving promise of hope and prosperity to the blue collar workers, of jobs coming back to America and that was his America first mentality to these people. I don't think that these people were nationalist in the sense that they were like, I don't think they were nationalist necessarily before. I think they hated to see their jobs disappearing out of the country, and that happened over decades. It wasn't just Obama. It was president and president before that, when globalism kind of did that. And I think that's where a lot of people got a negative perspective of globalism, was because things started shifting around when you started breaking borders down in the world. Companies could go anywhere and wherever the cheapest labor was. And so in America, where there was all this prosperity beforehand because of the war and everything that had happened, World War II, and then they saw that disappear because after World War II, the borders kind of broke down because there was more. The world became a friendlier place. There was more diplomacy going on between countries, and so you could actually take your company over to China, where you couldn't do that immediately after the war, and you could make your product a lot cheaper. So Americans who had always kind of enjoyed this prosperity, and now it disappeared, and when it disappeared, the blue collar workers were the ones that lost, whereas the upper class people, it didn't really make a difference because they were the ones running the companies out of the country anyway. So he knew how to get the majority, because the majority of people in America do fall under blue collar. And Hillary, when you go back to the election, she didn't take the time she didn't put in the legwork. And everyone will tell you that. They'll say that she, for every, I forget what they're called, these meetings where Trump has, the building and they all kind of come, I forget what they call it. Trump had like multiple, he did way more of those than Hillary did when he was traveling around. Hillary took a lot of days, I wouldn't say days off, but she wasn't promoting herself as much. And so because the polls were kind of telling everybody that she was going to win, so she kind of just relaxed. And I think she even admitted that was a deception even for her, that these polls were kind of misleading to people. So meanwhile, Trump was doing all this work and rallying up his troops, blue collar people. Anyway, that's more than we really have to get into with that. But I think that it had more to do with the promise of prosperity, I think, for the people.
Yeah, and I definitely have, but the promise, I definitely have a lack of, I'm not educated, okay? I'll admit it. So I'm trying to understand it, because between what I saw in Trump trade wars, it sounded like the same thing that somebody just mentioned a bit ago, I think. But when it came to the tariffs, it's talking, and maybe somebody understands it far better. I'm sure you guys all understand it far better than me. That when it talks about the tariffs and what the tariffs do, that they actually cause more problems on us than anything else. But it was talking about Hitler with Hitler and Stalin, when you were explaining on that, when they, Hitler was supposed to send his plans for buildings and such, because if I understood correctly in the Trump trade wars video, it shows that China, in the deals that they made, that they wanted, or we were supposed to give them the knowledge of the technology, and we didn't give it to them, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to understand these things to piece it together, because I
think
have to step up and be an educated person, because I'm not.
One thing that should be added to, I guess, everything that I said too, is because nationalism has grown since he was elected. And I think a lot of these people who weren't originally, they weren't really always thinking America first until he started touting that. And the way that he touted that mentality was he was putting America, it was this superiority thing. So I think that the people that maybe they didn't necessarily have this complex before, or they did in some, more of a minor scale, they started to hate China more and more. So they started to hate the Chinese more and more. They started to hate Mexicans more and more because they saw them as the enemy. And that's what Trump did, was he created this racist mentality that these people stole the jobs, and they didn't steal the jobs. It was their own people that took the jobs out of the country. It was American business owners that were going somewhere else and leaving people high and dry in America. But the workers were now getting this idea that the people in China were our enemy and the people in Mexico are our enemy. And that's really where I think the racism of Trump
Let me present this question then, because the other part of it that was going through my head was, and I don't want to say lower class or middle class or whatever, but I mean, I know how I lived my life in ignorance and naivety, and we're in a society where we want everything instant. So when you talk to some people that have a long-term view of things versus other people that just live for today.
Yeah.
So would that be part of why he was able to get some of the blue collar to be the way they were, because they just want what they want today, and so it sounds good today, and they don't know the long-term effect?
In Iowa right now, people and farmers, Democrats and Republicans, they love Trump, and they're saying, we know that what he's doing right now with China has us in a bad spot, but we think in the long term it's actually going to help us out.
Okay, because that's not what the Trump trade war seems to suggest, that things were far worse. So it's interesting, two sides, and I'm trying to understand to begin with what it all means.
Oh, can I say something?
Yeah.
On the news recently, I heard that Trump, he actually says there was something, I can't remember the interview, but I'm watching NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. He's also kind of on Frontline. He's on PBS. So there's an interview with Trump, and he says, I've never changed. I've always been this way. I can't remember what it was about. I think it was questions towards his attitude as far as what's going on now. Like they were getting his, but the key thing is that he mentions and states himself that I've always been this way. I've never changed. And it's so true. He
Even,
always
even when I was doing my presentation, there were people who wrote that. He's the same. He's the same as when he was a kid at school.
Well, that's the first thing that I believed that came out of his mouth.
Yeah, that's exactly what came out of his mouth.
In that trade war with Russia film, they actually show him in the 1980s
Yeah, I saw that.
talking about Japan and China, saying the same exact things.
Yep.
Now.
So that's one thing he has not lied about, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
He's never changed.
Well, I pray to catch up and understand some things that I've never paid attention to. I was just asking questions because I'm looking at how did he go about getting people to be the way that they are. But one of the points that I think John made is to get them all to believe that it's jobs that were stolen and we're going to get our jobs back, and people just don't really realize what it entails. I didn't even know what nationalism was. I would have thought it sounded like a good thing, you know what I mean? Until you start really looking at what it means, I would have thought it sounded like a good thing.
What job?
It seems like there's so much because of the prosperity message that he's giving that they're just even putting aside his mouth, his words, you know, the way he speaks, even though it like, why did you even say that? You know?
Yeah, there's comments on there. I know I've read a few of the articles.
He floors me. He's well from the beginning. He has floored me with his words, and it's just not presidential. Actually, you know, presidents don't speak like that. But a lot of people, because he's saying that we're making America great again, I guess they're putting up with that.
You know, it's interesting because if you look at America as the glorious land, that was their job function. That they were to be this place with a constitution that allowed freedom for everybody to come and fall under the same rights and freedoms. And now, just what you said, Tony, is that they're willing to put those values aside, to put the Constitution aside for temporal prosperity. So what happened in those lines is they'll go into captivity because of that. That's their apostasy when they go against their job function. So Americans, sorry.
Interesting the way you word that, because it's in the spirit of prophecy that they choose temporal prosperity. They choose the Sunday law in order to restore temporal prosperity. In other words, if the Sunday law is, according to how she defines it, the union of church and state means the acceptance of a spurious Sabbath. So if the union of church and state is what's going to bring the temporal prosperity, they're asking for temporal prosperity.
Yeah.
And that's why they go into, why they get destroyed, why they get punished.
What they don't realize is, though, the jobs that are leaving America are the hard, difficult jobs that people here
don't want to.
They don't want to do.
That's what I was saying.
And
what
they're going to third world or like less privileged countries to be able to help those people to also survive. And then here in this country, the technological advancements, I know they make life easier and they seem to take jobs out, but to maintain those technological advances, it does actually create other jobs. Like Google, how big it gets, it needs an insane amount of employees. There's other industries that are opening up while others are closing down. It's just a shift, but you don't see them talk about that because their rhetoric has to be pointing to the fact that you're losing everything. So vote for me so you don't lose everything.
That's an easy thing to say, I think, when you're standing outside and looking at it. But when you're in the inside, Americans, there's a lot of blue collar Americans that lost their jobs, they lost their homes, towns disappeared because of all that. So, and then these people who lost their jobs, they weren't the ones that were able to fill in these placements in high tech jobs. Yeah. The high tech jobs were for people who had higher education. So it was that's why you have all these really poor towns in these blue collar areas in America. Like I've driven around the US quite a bit, and I've not even seen things like that in Canada. Like where you come into a town and it's just like, you would think there's no one living there. And it's because they had an industry, and when that industry shipped, across overseas, these people were left with nothing, and the new jobs that came in weren't for them. So it's I wouldn't really say it's all cut and dry, that simple. Like I think it's a little bit, and then so now you have these people, like I think that comes more into line with what Elaine was saying, is that they don't have the education, so they do become more ignorant. They don't have any way of providing for themselves. So it's a mean way of looking at it, but Trump came in and kind of scooped up the ignorant. That's what he did. He was looking for the ignorant, and he filled them with hope.
You know, I think
Trump was groomed when
He's
he came into his to run for the presidency, to put out there that false hope that most politicians put out there. Because if you look at the track record of the politicians and what they say and what they do, I mean, if you look through the last, whatever, 200 years, it's just, we as people, we fall for it. And people who voted for Trump fell for it. Because look, a good example is the coal miners. He promised them that he would take care of them. And I think it's like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the company just closed up the mine, and them 600 coal miners that voted for him and professed that he was the best thing since sliced bread. Now they're just scratching just to pay the rent and all that other stuff. And the underlying thing that's happens over and over again is corporate greed. You have corporate greed that just take the U.S. people to, just rake them through the coals. They pocket whatever they can. They take the job somewhere else, and there we are, and the people are left holding the bag. I've seen it over and over again. You see it right now. Corporate greed is out of control right now. Look at the pharmaceuticals. They're charging this crazy money for drugs and stuff, like insulin for one thing. And they know this people are you'll die if you don't get it. So they can charge anyway, and there's only one company who makes it. So that's a prime example of corporate greed in America. But it's the national history, It's the national history. It's been done since the 13 colonies were here.
When we look at the idea of there being, this just kind of occurred to me, there being loose, that Satan, maybe not. When Satan comes down and impersonates Christ, we know that there's a false Messiah. We always had a certain perspective of what that's going to look like, and now I'm almost wondering, could that even be happening today, where you have this false, all these Christians are calling Trump Cyrus, they all think that he's like
right
God to them, and he's going around and promising all these things and supposedly fixing all these things. I don't know if you get what I'm implying, but I don't know if that, because we don't, it's sometimes we think the angel of light's going to come out of the sky and it's going to be obvious, and it's going to be what we always thought it was because of the way that we read it. But some of these things could be happening right now and we don't even really realize it.
Yeah, well, it's bringing forth Jesus' second coming, and that's the only positive thing I see out of it. It's the fulfillment of the prophecies that's been in this message here, and nobody else has seen it but us. Everybody else is lost in the world. Even the SDA church, I hate to say that, but they're just lost in the world right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on, and I have a lot to learn. I was curious to ask about how who he approached, and also about everybody becoming in such an instant society. Nobody wants to look at the long term, the long haul, so they take the instant fix, or the quick fix that there's a price for.
It's human nature.
Temporal prosperity.
Human nature.
Human nature, yeah. So, and it's the temporal prosperity, because that's definitely a part of why they choose Sundays. Why they're choosing this union of church and state is to restore temporal prosperity.
people aren't counting the cost. That's what it is too.
And they don't even know the cost. They've been so dumbed down. There's so many things.
Right? I don't think they want to know the cost.
That too. Well, if anybody has anything else to say, or otherwise we'll close it in prayer. Who wants to close in prayer for us?
Everyone muted their mic.
Jonathan, would you like to close us in prayer?
Sure. I had to mute my mic because I had to move my computer, and that gets loud, apparently. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this Sabbath day, and we thank you for all the blessings in this day, all the things that we were able to study and to learn about and to talk about. And the more we study and talk, Lord, the more that opens up, and it seems like there's just never enough time to go over all these things that seem so important for us right here in this time in history. Lord, we just pray that as we come together, that even though we all have different areas that maybe we're strong in, or we have different understandings of things, I just pray, Lord, that we'll be able to discuss these things and recognize that there is only one truth, and that we are all the students, and that you're teaching us. And I pray, Lord, that we will continue to have humble and meek spirits with you and with each other, that we will be able to discern truth from error, and that we will stay as a united group, Lord, and that we will not choose temporal prosperity as it is presented to us on the daily basis, but Lord, that we will choose our job function above all things, because our job function is to serve you, Lord. And we know that it won't always be easy. We know that things will be difficult and the trials will be put upon us, Lord. But as the refiner's fire, it burns off all the dross, Lord, and that's what we're looking at right now. Dross that we didn't even know was there. These things about ourselves that are becoming more and more apparent, and just how much had to be shed from us, Lord, and all these steps that you took us along the way to get to where we are right now, to see things that we could not see even just a year ago. So Lord, we thank you for giving us the spiritual eyesight and removing the scales from our eyes, and keeping us humble enough to accept that we are full of bad patterns and bad understanding, and just poor reading of the scriptures, Lord. But that through obedience, Lord, you're able to show us what you're able to do when we let go of our preconceived ideas, and when we let go of our temporal comforts. You're able to show us exactly the divine things, Lord, that you wish to show us, and what righteousness truly looks like as you purify us. So Lord, I'm so thankful for this group of people, that you've brought us all here together through Zoom in different places around the world. And it seems like we get new visitors, and we're encouraged by that, Lord, to see that there are more out there, Lord, that it's not just us. And so, Lord, I thank you for this group, and I pray that you'll continue to encourage each one of us to continue in our studies. I pray that you'll give us discernment, Lord, so that we'll have understanding. And I pray, Lord, that we'll have the desire to come into obedience to you with all the things in our life that we've yet to fully let go of, Lord. I pray that none of us would hang on to our cherished sins, and that you would forgive us, Lord, for all our past sins. So, Lord, I thank you so much for the blessings of this Sabbath. There's a lot of joy to be had in these messages, Lord, and it's a good thing to recognize that. But, Lord, I pray for patience, that you'll hold us back so that we don't run ahead of the message. Lord, we thank you so much for all these things, and we pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I have a question. What if we reason from cause to effect, and the effect is a line of failure? What was the cause to the line of failure? No, that's okay. what causes a line of failure?
Apostasy.
Yeah.
You have to be more specific. What do you mean?
Well, I'm trying to just get other responses. I mean, I have my own thoughts and my own response, but I wanted to see what other people think. What brings us to failure?
What was that?
Uh-oh, you're fading.
Can you give?
Go ahead.
Ask it again.
Don't slam stuff over there.
John, try again.
A historical example of a cause in a line of failure?
Well, it kind of was something that you said in your prayer that made me think about it. And I don't remember specifically what you said, but what causes in anything, what causes failure, I guess. I'm thinking about the particular lines, what causes the line of failure. My thoughts on it that went through my mind as you were praying, something you said kind of triggered this thought, is that we're still working for self. If we were working for the Lord, and this is a line of success, so it will produce a group of people that will not be self-serving. It'll produce a group of people that will serve the Lord and serve others.
Mm-hmm.
With meekness and humbleness. Those were many things you mentioned in the prayer. So I was thinking about that when you were praying.
So you just mean a line of success in God's line, not in like the wars or anything.
Yeah. What really causes apostasy, but what is apostasy? It's going your own way, right?
Yeah, and stepping away from your job function.
Disobedience.
So yeah, when you go to job function, because I think you mentioned that too. So if you have a job function and you're trying to do your job function your way, or you're refusing to do your job, what have you, it's still going to be self. To me, I mean, there's a lot of other answers, but what was on my mind was that to go your own way, to try to do it your own way, or to refuse to do it. But this is a line of success. So what he's producing is a group of people that will fully serve him, that will submit and surrender and serve others in this great work. So I'm going to grab I don't always save the chat, and I'll forget that, but I'm going to text myself, Sister Marcia, real quick, or email myself, I think is what I meant to say, your address so that I don't forget it. And then I'll add you to the list, and we send out the audio as well after our studies, and the video is posted on 2 different websites, and you'll get the links to those websites. So you'll be able to access any notes or audio that we do as well.
Does Brother Jeffrey in the group there have that as well? He's been around.
He's on the email list.
He's on the email list? Okay. I've only seen him in here a couple of times, so I wasn't sure if he had all that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure if you want to unmute your mic there, Brother Jeffrey, I think you're in Africa somewhere, aren't you? So I'm not sure if he's awake.
He's in Kenya, I think that's what he mentioned.
Yeah, he said he was Kenyan, I think.
Okay, yeah.
He's probably asleep.
He might have fallen asleep, because I know they're totally upside down or backwards to time. So
that's pretty awesome.
But anyways, that was my thinking on it, is the line of success. God will produce a line of success because it will be people that are totally surrendered to him, that are willing to do his work and to do his work his way. They'll be I think the way that Adriana described it, a well-oiled machine. A well-oiled machine that are coming into line. And some of the things to bring us into line sting along the way, but if we keep our eyes on Jesus and don't look to the left or to the right, and we pray for the mind of Christ, and we pray that our only ambition would be to reveal his character, we can't go wrong. Because of his promises, we can't go wrong. The only part that would cause us to trip up is if our heart is not right. We don't let the heart be surrendered and let his heart be our heart, because we still had something that won't fit through the door. So, and if I caused anybody problems with my part of the discussion today, please forgive me. I just, I just, you know, a lot of us have been through these things and seen a lot of people. As soon as it comes, a lot of people wind up, you know, pitting against each other, and it's like Satan wants us to pit against each other. If we're going to go through, we're going to come unite together through this and work our way through it, and
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. So though we learned in Acts of the Apostle, it's Christ that brings these truths these truths at a particular time, and it's him that's actually causing the division. But how we handle that division will make or break going forward. And it's always my prayer that every one of us keep going forward no matter what. And but yeah, we're gonna all hit things that touch us, that in our own personal selves, individually. So anyways, I just wanted to share that. So anybody have anything else? And Sister Marcia, I did send your email address to my own, I emailed it to me, so I won't miss it.
I have, well, I want to wait.
Go ahead.
Because I think somebody wanted to see.
Oh, is somebody going to talk? Sister Dana? No? Okay, well, I'm going to end it if you're,
Well, no,